Off to Doug Carson's chair of the PCL board. He's moderating the next panel on abundance. Thank you, panelists.
All right. Well, thank you, Howard, and thank you, everybody. I mean, what a compelling day of panels we've been having, huh? That's disturbing but necessary. I like that last description on inspiring in a certain way. Well, we're here. We've gathered, as I'm about to introduce, or ask them to introduce themselves for just briefly, a panel of variety of different perspectives and voices. What I'd like to do is do something of a afternoon talk show format where I'm going to stand up here and talk with you, but also the audience at the same time. So I'm going to focus on one speaker at each moment. Right now, let me ask them to just briefly introduce yourselves, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to say one thing. But can we just start right here with Ebony, if you'd like to say hi and who you are?
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here and have this important conversation. I am Ebony Twilley Martin, former executive director of Greenpeace US. I spent about 12 years at the organization working on everything from climate to oceans to forests, and also driving equity through the organization, both programmatically and operationally. So this is the work, and I'm glad to be here to discuss it with you all. And I'm from Washington, D.C. So.
Thank you for coming. And then Dylan.
Hi, I'm Dylan Gouch-Lewis. I'm a senior researcher at the Revolving Door Project. We're an anti-corporate influence watchdog. I run our economic media project, which is, I read centrist pundits so no one else has to. And that basically, thank you. That means basically two things for our purposes here. One is that pretty much all of you can run laps on me talking about environmental policy. And two is I know an ungodly amount about centrist think tanks and who's funding them and the different interconnections between all of the pundits and academics and everyone in that ecosystem.
And we're going to hear every bit of that in just a little bit. So thank you, Dylan. And Greg, you may need to turn the microphone on. There you are.
It's on, yeah, okay. Yeah, hi, my name's Greg Weaver. I work for an independent news organization, kind of the other end of the brain rot of the centrist organizations she's talking about. And I write about land use and the environment, so kind of good intersection of abundance in the sense of, what it's thinking it's trying to address with housing affordability. I think that's really its central concern kind of its repressions, let's just say, or the gouging of the administrative state that it wants to oversee to, solve these problems.
Good preview. Okay, thank you. Then Corey.
Hi, my name's Corey Brown. I'm the AARP representative on this panel. But I've spent, no, I don't work for AARP, but I am a member. But I spent the last 40 years working for different environmental groups on environmental policy, conservation funding. In the 80s, I was PCL's general counsel, did a lot of work on CEQA defense. Last couple of decades, I've been with Resources Legacy Fund, where I retired in September. Great to see everybody here. Thank you.
All right, and then Asha.
Hi again, Asha Sharma with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. We're a community-based environmental justice organization based in Inland, California. Thank you.
And if you missed that last panel, then you missed a lot. So thank you, Asha. And Jen?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Ganata. I'm the Legal Department Co-Director of Communities for a Better Environment. We're an environmental justice organization based out of Southern California, in Southeast LA, in Wilmington, the city of LA, as well as in the Bay Area, East Oakland, and Richmond. I actually started off at CBE as a youth organizer, so I was the Wilmington youth organizer. I worked there for a while, and then I transitioned to doing housing justice work. So I was an eviction defense attorney. In Los Angeles, I did housing for about 5 years, and I returned to CBE. So my background in environmental justice has a lot to do with housing and environmental justice intersect. I am based out of the Southeast LA office, so if you come down to LA and you want to take a toxic tour, you might see me.
That is great. And is it right to say I'd highly recommend the toxic tour, or can I just say it's a thing? So thank you, Jen. So let me frame this up a little bit and then hand it back over, focus on one speaker at a time, and then we're all going to discuss sort of with each other, and we're also going to leave an inordinate amount of time for questions and answers at the end. So it may be possible that you could ask during, but we're going to have a big chunk at the end also where we're going to have a generalized discussion. So the thing that we wanted to, that we got it together to think about was, we've heard today about this 131 rolling back, the threats coming, and what's behind that? A lot of the philosophy, ask people in the Capitol, you hear things like, well, the governor's handing around this book called Abundance and telling people, we've got to deregulate everything. This is the way to get to that utopia that they don't really describe, but it sounds kind of like California Forever, that city we heard. So the prominent examples in the book, I see only one of us have a copy of it down there. That's probably a borrowed copy. That wasn't bought, right?
It's from the LA Public Library.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to clarify that this book, written by Klein and Thompson, is using a couple of prominent examples in California. These are, I understand, to be New York kind of authors, but California's high-speed rail and California's affordability crisis and California's ordinances in, say, the city of Los Angeles to require filtration, things like that. And they have drawn this picture of a difficulty in government to build things, infrastructure like high-speed rail, or to build housing or get to the affordability that we need. And they lay the blame at the feet of environmental regulation. And that's what a lot of this scapegoating is. And I'll call that the abundance fallacy. And it creates this illusion of utopia that then drives policy, like in the legislature. And I used the term people being moonstruck by abundance. Moonstruck is that movie from the 80s, you remember, where you get under the influence of a certain, just enamored of things, and then move along to make decisions based on that. And we know that community health and environmental protections may be at risk through that. Hence the title, and I'd like to now turn to the panelists, starting with Ebony, on are we at risk, communities, environments, democracy, because of this abundance? And it's a big question to start off with, but you're bringing the national perspective, and I'd like to ask you to start, please.
Sure. So I think when we hear the word abundance, it brings a sense of optimism. It brings a sense of encouragement. Everybody wants abundance. We want an abundance of clean air. We want an abundance of clean energy. We want abundance. But I think the issue, as you named, the tension comes in with how we actually achieve that abundance. And according to Thompson and Klein, it's to deregulate and to remove what they call as regulations, but to me, they're called safeguards, and things that protect our community. And when my friend told me about the book, and of course I heard about it in DC, and so I picked up the book and she said, I think it's gonna make you a little angry. So I read the book, and she was right, it did make me a little angry, and so I set to writing. And what I feel is that Ezra and Thompson have had what I call a memory lapse or some sort of amnesia. So we have to, first of all, look at why the regulation was put into place. So we need to look at the history. And things were not good. We have the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act for a reason. Lakes were on fire, pollution was concentrated in certain areas, and so we had to figure out ways to safeguard communities. And that is actually what the regulation is. The second amnesia that I think they have is the democracy amnesia. In regulation, in the safeguarding, that leaves space for community input. We as a community have a voice in saying how our environment is shaped. When you remove that, you are taking away a voice, and that is an erosion of democracy. And so it was startling to me how it kind of puts a veil over what they say democracy is while actually taking the power out of a democracy. And if we remove public review, oh, everything's going to be okay. Well, who is it going to be okay for? And what is that definition of abundance for you as opposed to what it is for me? And the third thing that was startling was the amnesia of equity. Equity is not mentioned at all that I saw, or maybe it was framed in different ways. But how are we determining a baseline for everyone so that we all have what we feel is an abundance, how we all feel safe? And in the last conversation, a lot came up about the data centers, and that is what we're dealing with in my community. The reason I found myself into the environmental movement was when my 3-year-old son at the time developed asthma. I asked the doctor, how did he get asthma? I thought it was hereditary. She asked me where I lived. I said, oh, I live in an apartment. And she said, well, is there grass? Are there trees around? I said, no, there are 2 highways. She said, your son's asthma is environmentally induced. And so it struck me that my son and all of his friends basically had asthma, and we as moms did not know why they had the asthma. And then this year we hear that they are putting a data center about half a mile from where I used to live. So if there's already pollution there, what do we think the data center is going to be? We also know over the summer, I'm not sure about you all, but my electricity bill went up by 20%. And I read that across the country, it has gone up by 30%. And a lot of this is due to the data centers. They use intensive amounts of energy. They use intensive amounts of water. And they also are locking our cities back into fossil fuels when at a time we need to be drawing down. So also in this, when they went to put the data center in our community, they just announced it on TV like it was nothing. And, you know, everybody in the county was like, well, wait a minute. Did anybody go to a hearing for this? Did anybody hear? Was there any type of environmental impact assessment? Who's going to cover the cost of the extra electricity that we have to use? Who's going to cover the cost of upgrading the electrical grid? Because you also said that that has to happen. And they didn't really have answers. And so what we see in these processes when there is a lack of regulation, the accountability becomes diffused. And the benefits become concentrated in a certain area, and the risk and the harms are socialized in another area. Usually that's my area. The harm comes to our communities. So what really is this abundance? Your abundance is a bit different from mine because you have basically exported your harm onto our communities. And so we cannot write off regulation as just paperwork. It is actually our voice. It is where democracy lives. It's where accountability lives. And these are the things that we actually need to strengthen in this time. And we know that data centers are largely unregulated, and this is kind of following the abundance creed. And we'll start to see this in all of our communities in many different ways. We just heard in the last panel how many things were named, but without definition. And that's how you diffuse accountability, and that's how you diffuse cost. And so these are things, not just cost, and then also our health. There have been no health assessments or impacts. So these are dangerous things that we are putting in the framework of a beautiful abundance. And I am for abundance, but an equitable abundance where we all are able to prosper and live healthy lives.
I am. thank you all for coming. I think that'll wrap it up. Thank you. That really helps us get started today. I mean, I asked, I knew you're writing The Amnesia of Abundance, and I've seen your work, but to see you and hear in person, I'm just in awe. So thank you.
Thank you for
You've seen
having
it in Congress. You've seen it everywhere. You've seen it nationally. You've seen it in other states. We did just talk about 131 and removing kind of the accountability and the review. What you've seen that, as you described, in other places. Is this a phenomenon we're stuck with, or what can we do?
It is a phenomenon that is taking hold, but I think it's uneven. In certain places, you'll hear it more than in others. I'm in D.C., so in Capitol Hill, there is a new caucus that is bipartisan called Build Back America, and it is very closely aligned with the abundance agenda, although they don't call it that. It's very closely aligned, and we hear these phrases around cutting red tape. We hear phrases around cutting agencies. We hear phrases around we need to build faster. So we know their goal is speed and build out of infrastructure. But what we don't hear is the human cost of doing things this quickly, the human cost of not considering your community member at the base level. And so I think I hear and I understand when you also talk to members of Congress, their community members are frustrated because they need things. And I think what has happened is the government has not been able to keep pace with the scale, has not been able to scale with the pace of how, what we need in our community. And the government has not been able to deliver benefits. And so they feel as if, okay, well, if we just move these things out the way, we can get this done quicker, and we will get our constituents to shut up. But what will come later is when that electricity bill hits, I'm in the hospital because cancer is in my system now because of something you didn't tell me about, or we didn't do a review, we didn't do a health assessment. Those costs are going to catch up. And so what we're trying to do now is work in a bipartisan way to help the representatives understand that they must include community input in any large-scale project. Otherwise, it's going to cost you, and it's going to cost you big later, especially if you want your seat. And that's what we've told our Maryland representatives. And so the data center that they were building, it is on hold now because they knew they had an election coming up. But this can't be just because an election is coming up. It has to be a general galvanization towards equity for everyone, for shared power, shared benefits. It can't just be concentrated.
Thank you. And again, I'm leaving space so that we'll all have a conversation, but I'd like to ask for a more state perspective, more local. We've heard national, it's happening everywhere. I want to focus or kind of drill down on a community here in California, or communities in California, and for that, Asha and Jen. But Asha, if you would like to go first, please.
Thank you. Jen and I would actually like to start with a visioning exercise. So I'm going to cede my time to you all, actually, and ask you 2 questions. You can either think about these questions or write them down, whatever you prefer. The first question is, what does an abundant and equitable world look like to you? So I'll give folks a couple minutes to write that down. And then there will be a follow-up question.
And you can take notes on your phone too if you want, right?
Yes, phones are allowed.
Computer.
Electronics are allowed. Not AI. Yeah, do the minus thing. -1.
-1. No Chat GPT, no Grok, especially not Grok, I heard. Are we going to have a clock? What is it, 30 seconds or what?
Okay. And then the second question is, what are the reasons why we don't have that abundant or equitable world that you just envisioned? And would really like for people to try to think of, a reason and then the root of that reason. And also, because we're talking about equity, which I agree is largely excluded from the book itself, specifically, why don't low-income people have access to this world that you envisioned? So folks could take a couple minutes to think about that and write down your response.
If you write CEQA, Doug will attack you.
Thank you, Dylan.
I'll see if they want. So would love to see if a few brave people would be willing to share specifically your responses to the last question of kind of what are the barriers that you see in us achieving a more abundant and equitable world?
Money and politics.
politics. Love that.
We didn't practice this, but I got a microphone.
Perfect. Anyone else want to share?
You want to just verbally out?
Historical racism.
Fun.
Privatizing the gain and cost. That's water.
Privatizing gain and socializing costs. I just realized we're all on camera, so we may get for the recording. I'll just go with the mic. I'll repeat.
I think there's a myth of unlimited resources. And so we think we can
A myth of unlimited resources. Kevin Johnson up there, actually also the author of the Oath Project book. He's a recognized and recent author up there. So go ahead, Kevin Johnson. I'll summarize that as a frozen system, a constitutionalist kind of gridlock. Over here, council member.
Yeah, I'd like to make, on trees committee, so I'd like to make trees a resource for the community, a community asset, not private property. And so all of its living things and habitats belong to the community, not to the individuals.
Trees and all living things, a resource. Sounds like a public trust. The book doesn't have any birds in it or trees. I think that's one thing we... One more? I'll keep on going up. Okay. Yes, please. And I'll let you the microphone because I think we're not capturing everything.
Private equity.
Private equity.
Loss of the commons.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Loss of the commons. I'm going back down.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for sharing. Did anyone notice any common trends? I definitely did.
These are all features of capitalism.
Bingo. Yes, I would say all features of capitalism. I think people are really pointing out a lot of the structural inequities that people are seeing in terms of wealth, money, racial disparities. And unfortunately, we don't see any of this addressed in abundance, which I think is my main critique about the book, as we've all talked about, it's really focused on deregulation, specifically of environmental protections, which Jen is going to talk more about why these have been so essential, especially for the communities that we work with. But really, at a really fundamental level, in my personal opinion, it sounds like maybe others as well, the book is really not addressing, I think, the systemic reasons why we don't have abundance, especially in communities that have been fighting for that abundant world and feel the farthest from it. So I would say that that would be my biggest critique, but thank you everyone for sharing your ideas. I'll pass it to Jen.
So in terms of the work that Communities for a Better Environment does statewide, we work a lot around oil and gas, and so a big project of ours in SoCal is around standing together against neighborhood oil drilling in Los Angeles, so it's called Stand LA. That's one big part. We also work on refinery issues, both in the communities of Richmond and in Wilmington. We work on issues around freeway expansion. We've been working on the 710 that's been trying to expand since the early 2000s. And I think you could see in both Southeast LA and East Oakland, really what we see is incompatible land uses, right? So you have, which means essentially for all the communities that we work in, is you have communities that are frontline communities living alongside polluting facilities. That has been, the organization started in 1978. I understand that it was more of a canvassing organization. It starts kind of to turn into what it is now, where we have organizing, policy, and legal teams working together closer into the 90s. But really what we have used a lot is CEQA. In fact, when I was a youth organizer, so much of my job was breaking down CEQA, thinking about comments, talking to youth members and adults about how can we engage in this project. Yes.
Well, Jen, I want to ask, because there was a lot of, probably 3 mentions of Exide today. Do
Right.
you know, can you explain Exide or what's up with that?
So Exide is a battery recycler located in the city of Vernon. Exide has actually existed for quite a long time. The Exide technologies, I believe, started around the 2000s, but before that it was a lead smelter previously. So Vernon is an industrial city. However, it is in the middle of a very dense part of Los Angeles. So on one side is Boyle Heights, city of LA. On the other side is East LA. And on the other side of that is you have the southeast communities of Maywood, Cudahy, Huntington Park. And for a really long time, it was emitting essentially lead into the communities. So much so that by the time it had shut down and people had talked about, there's lead in the soil, we're talking about 3,000 parts per million of lead. Technically, it is dangerous it's dangerous in general. But in the state level, it's like 80 parts per million, right? So you're seeing communities that actually have higher levels of lead than, the communities of the Palisades and Altadena. It's really interesting right now is I'm part of this soil remediation group with a group in UCLA, and we're talking about there's legacy contaminations in communities of color, like in Southeast LA, and there's also the fire communities, right? The communities that have had the fire and having high levels of lead, and you can see that a lot of the cleanup also has learned a lot from community cleanups like in Exide, but we're still dealing with them right now. Prior to this administration, it was kind of gearing up to be on the Superfund list. They weren't looking at the soil contamination anymore, but actually they were looking at the high levels of TCE in the water plume. So I'm talking about pollution that has existed for centuries, or a century at least, in this community of Southeast LA, which is a pretty dense community. And you see that similarly in Wilmington. So when people talk about Exide, they don't want another Exide. It's because it's cost over hundreds of millions of dollars to clean up, and it's not actually done being cleaned up. And by the end of this last year, they were running out of money. So I'm actually not sure what's funding still the cleanup.
And how many generations of kids get screwed up before there's actually any justice, right?
A lot, right, exactly. And it continues to happen. And so I think, I actually, I think about where we were when we started talking about abundance, and now I think about where we are now, with all the ice raids, which also Southeast LA has been having such a high concentration of DHS being in the community. It's just having this overwhelming sense of we're already dealing with a lot of environmental pollution, but we're consistently also dealing with so many other things that are intersecting. So I think when we talk about abundance, when we think about what that means, it's not simply just about having more units of housing or having et cetera. It's thinking about where is the cleanup? How do we make sure community or families get to stay together in the communities? And I think those things are not, they're definitely not addressed in the book, but I feel like all of that also contributes to things like environmental health outcomes. It also contributes to what other burdens are in these communities. So I think Exide is just one of the many other issues that exist in Southeast LA alone.
And thank you, Jen. I want to ask about the cleanup, green up, because this is something that was in the abundance book for those who actually may have read it. And I know Dylan was one of those who see there's an example in there of an ordinance in LA that requires filters near freeways, or what's this about?
Yeah, so I actually was a youth organizer working on Cleanup Green Up when it first started. One of the things, this is something that also comes up in the 710 campaign, is the proximity to freeways, right? Because when you live by a freeway, you have higher concentrations of particulate matter. As a result of that, you need air filtration. So in addition to that, it's not just the freeways. Usually when you have communities where there are freeways, there's typically cumulative impacts. So having air filtration, if you're within 1,000 feet, it's part of the ordinance. It says, I think it says shall provide MERV 13 filters if you're in a building that has continuous ventilation. And even that talking point, that actual ordinance in the city of LA got passed in April of 2016. Having those policy conversations now, people don't want to hear it. They're people live along the freeways all the time, et cetera. I have to remind folks all the time, yes, but number one, you have to keep your windows closed. Number two, you have to have air filters. And number three, are you saying those people can never go outside? They're not allowed to play. They're not allowed to do anything else. And it's been a real struggle because it's oh, that's an added cost. Who's going to update the filters, et cetera. But I think if we're thinking about, I think it's one thing to think about units, but it's also another thing to think about where are people living, and how do you think about where they're living equitably, or are you saying, I remember Dr. Bullard, who lots of people call as the father of environmental justice. He often talks about your zip code is one of the determinants of what your health outcome will be. So essentially, you're telling people, because you live there, your life expectancy or the impact to your health is going to be a certain way, and that's just how it is. And I think that's also something, when we think about abundance and we think about the units that we need, but can we think about units that are actually also healthy for communities? Because number one, we need healthy, affordable housing. Number two, the cost of housing isn't just the actual units getting built, but it's also what about the cost for people? I think, Ebony was referencing this. What is it cost for health insurance? If you are being impacted by health, different emissions, et cetera, and you have chronic diseases, who's going to help you with that? That's not something we think about because we put that on the individual and we put that on their insurance policy if you have insurance, but those are also economic determinants, right, for a person. So I think as we think about the types of housing we need, and we do need deeply affordable housing, can we make it a way too that is also healthy? I think, CBE is part of the California Environmental Justice Alliance, and so is Leadership Council. Those are all the things that we've been asking for. We are not against housing. We are actually really for deeply affordable housing, but that's also not what's ever being presented. Because when they talk about abundance, it's about the amount of units. It doesn't really talk about the types of units and where those units are.
Let me ask you about that, because a lot of people, CBE, LCGA, a number of organizations, CBD, went on a lobby day in May on SB 607, which was the predecessor of SB 131. And what kind of vibe did you get in the Capitol talking with electeds and their staff And, were they under the influence of, well, we got to, deregulate CEQA? What did you feel going around in the Capitol?
I'm glad that you brought that up because I think no one's actually mentioned that SB 131, the predecessor for it was about infill housing, just infill housing. And it ends up becoming like advanced manufacturing and all these other things that go into it. So folks who are in California Environmental Justice Alliance, LCGA, other groups that were interested in safeguarding CEQA, we went with community members to talk to different legislators, and all of them seem really supportive. They we understand what you're saying, we get it, we want a healthy environment, because it's also, we organize youth. So how are you gonna tell youth who are concerned about this, deeply concerned about it, that, we don't really care about the environmental regulation part. I think that's also that piece, for the organizing, what's so important is, I think the conversation for little d democracy, how important that is to be able to talk to your legislator and have a discussion and maybe think about what are the outcomes of it versus, as Asha was mentioning the panel before, a lot of the decisions that happened in SB 131 happened with no transparency. And, I actually think that transparency is necessary for democracy. You can't be having closed door sessions. You can't say that you're representing people's interests if you're not really listening to your constituents.
Thank you. And could we be explicit about that? This was, I think people talked about the dark of night. It was a Thursday evening, I think at 1 a.m. for a Friday sort of hearing and vote. And on Monday, the bill passed. Friday was the first time anybody saw it. And this was under the governor saying, my budget signature is not going to be valid if you don't pass this thing. So you may have heard people with the kind of lip service support, but then they all vote for the bill, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it was a harsh kind of way and process. But thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
And Asha, I'm going to kind of move to a little bit more to bring people into the discussion. But again, we're having an inordinate amount of time for Q&A after we get through all. And next, I'd like to, again, come back to Dylan. I understand that you've got some slides and a deep dive into where did this abundance thing come from and who is it and what's it about? And you've been working on this a lot, right? So can you tell us?
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully people can hear me okay. I want to start with a couple of quick caveats. I'm actually going to go in the opposite order. I'm sorry if my voice cracks or if I'm hard to hear at any point. One of my vocal cords was paralyzed last summer, so yeah, that's a fun thing. The other disclaimer is I am going to be painting with a pretty wide brush about the abundance ecosystem, and I don't think you should take that as me saying that everyone involved, every group involved is corrupt or bought. A lot of people here work at nonprofits. I think we all know that sometimes you go where the money is, and abundance is where the money is. And I think there's plenty of groups that mean well and do valuable work that are going along to get along and to get grants. But I'm going to try and condense about 8 years of history into, I was told to keep it to around 10 minutes, so we'll try to stay well within 20. So most people, I think, understand abundance as this thing Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, but mostly people know Ezra Klein wrote that came out last spring. It goes back considerably further than that. So abundance grew out of, it's basically a marriage between a right flank libertarian movement that calls itself Progress Studies and the more centrist left liberal front that they usually refer to themselves as supply side liberals. Now they usually go by abundance liberals. But that is basically YIMBYism applied across all policy areas is sort of the simplest way of doing that. But where I'm going to start the timeline is 2018, when the Libertarian Mercatus Center at George Mason University launched Emergent Ventures, which is probably what I would consider the first abundance funder. Emergent Ventures was launched with a $1 million grant from Peter Thiel, who you might know from Palantir, who have been in the news for their relationship with ICE recently. The fund, Emergent Ventures, is overseen by a libertarian economist named Tyler Cowen. Ezra Klein might be the public face for my money, and PCL did just give me a travel reimbursement check, so I have a little bit. For my money, Tyler Cowen is really the ideas guy, and a lot of what Ezra Klein writes is really a liberal veneer of what Tyler Cowen said years ago. In 2019, Tyler Cowen wrote this article that's on the screen in The Atlantic, which, now has David Brooks as well. So more good stuff to come. He co-wrote it with Patrick Collison, who you might know is the CEO of Stripe, the payment processor. The article's called "We Need a New Science of Progress," and it lays out the case for progress studies. Basically, the idea is we need to look at where there are bottlenecks in society that are keeping us from attaining progress, and then we need to clear those bottlenecks. It should sound a little bit familiar. Then on the center left, in the early Biden years, you start to see the advent of supply-side liberalism. Ezra Klein is the most prominent. Here's a couple of other examples. Particularly, this movement crystallized around the fight over Build Back Better and later Joe Manchin demanding his Mountain Valley Pipeline. You can see a couple of examples, again from The Atlantic and also from New York Magazine, that are lambasting environmentalists for being the reason that a permitting deal and Build Back Better didn't happen. So that is sort of where you see the center-left crystallizing. A number of the writers and thinkers who are very involved on that front are sort of taking YIMBY ideas. They've been involved in YIMBY organizing and politics for a while and applying that to energy. And then from 2022 onwards, they start to apply that YIMBY frame to more and more types of policy. In 2022, Derek Thompson, so it's kind of, I think it's very funny that he got the lower billing on the book cover, but he coined the phrase the abundance agenda again in The Atlantic in 2022, and he calls it a simple plan to solve all of America's problems. So, blame him, blame his editor, but it's quite an ambitious gambit they're going for. In 2023, we start to see the advent of explicitly abundance-aligned organizations. A couple of the big ones are Inclusive Abundance, which is the main organizing arm of the entire ecosystem. They also, if you go to their website, have a list of all of the different groups that they consider part of the movement. There's some really interesting ones there, including the Cato Institute, also the Federation for American Innovation, which writes some crazy things. The Manhattan Institute is on there. So there is quite a robust right flank there. Also, you see the Bay Area-based Abundance Network, which I forget what it was called at first, but it wasn't. It was a slightly different name. In 2024, then you see the inaugural Abundance Conference that was being held. And this is where I enter the story. So I don't know how well you can see it. The backdrop of this slide is a portion of the piece that I wrote in November of 2024, which was the first critical review of the Unfurling Abundance Agenda. A couple of reviewers of the book took issue with it as an unfair treatment of what Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson wrote, which is a little funny because it's from 5 months before the book was published. I am not bitter at all, but the kicker from this is the line, abundance is neoliberalism repackaged for a post-neoliberal world. a number of people are still mad at me for writing that.
Dylan, for clarity, the RDP that was on that slide is the revolving door project.
Yes, the people who give me health insurance and money to come and do all this work. And that essay was published in the American Prospect. This is a screenshot from an essay from two fellows at the centrist Niskanen, I always want to say Niskanen, but Niskanen Center, which itself peeled off of the Cato Institute. It was the more moderate elements of the Cato Institute peeling off to form a more centrist think tank. This is from two of their fellows in 2024, taking explicit aim at environmentalism. If you read the book or if you read other writings, this is not a one-off. They refer to environmental justice goals and public employee unions as NIMBY-like mechanisms. So you can sort of see that proliferation of the YIMBY mindset across policy domains there. Now we get to the juicy part. I wanted to have a rough estimate of how much money there is in abundance organizing, but I lost power from the winter storm, so I don't have that. So we're just going to say hundreds of millions of dollars because I can say that with confidence, because there are two separate $120 million grant funds that have been launched. One is run by Open Philanthropy, which you can see up there. They've since changed their name to Coefficient Giving. That was rolled out shortly after the book's release. And the other is a state capacity fund that is run by, I think it's the Recoding America Fund, but I can double check that. So the first conference in 2024, the key sponsors were Renaissance Philanthropy, which was launched with money from Facebook co-founder Dustin Moskovitz, Schmidt Futures, which was launched with money from Eric Schmidt, Stand Together, which is one of the primary funding vehicles for the Koch network, and Charles Koch's influence campaign, and Arnold Ventures, which is John Arnold. He's a former semi-current energy trader. He still is doing some energy trading, but has publicly rebranded somewhat to be more of a philanthropist. He has, the reason he's up here is also because he's on Meta's board specifically to help them, I believe he said specifically to help them with energy infrastructure build out for data centers.
Before you go on, Arnold's the guy who worked for Enron, right? He got out before it crashed with a lot of cash.
Yep.
And this is the guy who spiked Enron spiked California electricity prices as their big racket, right?
That seems right.
And so now he's working on what again?
Abundance.
Can I point out you guys are talking in the like a common language of investigative people, because Greg there's an investigative reporter, Fresno Land. We'll get to you in a second, but you guys got it all like mapped out. So
we love John too.
Yes. And then some more funding from last year's conference. So again, ClearPath is, they are supposed to be an energy abundance group, but they really don't focus very much at all on renewables. They're really big on natural gas. Also, Pacific Legal Foundation, by the way, that's John Yu's current organization, the Bush torture guy. So, and then you see Arnold Ventures again, Open Philanthropy again, Stand Together again. I would also like to point out two of those sponsors are literal Silicon Valley trade associations. Chamber of Progress is a 501c6, which is a tax designation no one has heard of, that applies to a very specific subsection of trade associations and also nonprofit professional American football leagues for some reason. Yeah. The New American Industrial Alliance is also a Silicon Valley tech industry association. It includes Meta, it includes Palantir. They're sort of a left-right pincer. Chamber of Progress is the left. New American Industrial Alliance is on the right. Fun fact, the Chamber of Progress founder got his start in politics as a grape scab at Harvard. His first foray into organizing was getting the Harvard dining hall to cross the picket line for the United Farm Workers. Coincidentally, his parents ran a grape farm. This is a report that my colleague Henry put out. And yes, you can see the conspiratorial corkboard looking web there. All of those are real connections, I promise. If you find this insightful, he's building off of my earlier work. If you don't like it, it's all his fault and I had nothing to do with it. You can see Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, Klein and Thompson. There's Jen Palka. She runs one of the $120 million funds. There's the Abundance Network, Stand Together. And this link will be available for y'all to peruse more leisurely in your own time. And then the last thing I have is just a ton of reading if people want. This top highlighted one is a web page that my organization has that hosts a ton of research and different resources and links, so it's a good place to start. Even more stuff we've written. Oh, the top thing here, the pro market piece, is something that I wrote that looked at that LA air filter law specifically. And I did the math. It costs $100 per unit per year for the upgraded air filters, which for a 100-unit apartment complex works out to $10,000 a year. The lower standard air filters that would have been used instead would be about $2,000 a year. So it works out to $8,000 a year. If it prevents one case of lung cancer a decade, it pretty much comes close to breaking even before considering like lost work days or any of the more intangible things. And then even more recommended reading. And even more. And Doug can send these slides out so that you don't need to worry about writing all of this down. So I did not track my time. Hopefully that was less than 20 minutes, like I promised.
It was less than 20 minutes. Thank you. I was astounded in hearing and preparing for this, and I immediately it flashed in my head. I don't know why I go for history buff stuff, but anybody who know the arsenal of democracy? It's America in World War II. It's before we joined the war to fight fascism. They said, "Oh, this is the arsenal of democracy. We're supplying stuff." This to me looks like the arsenal of activism. This is places where you can go and you can get resources, and it's all on their website. I'm not sure I need to send it to everybody, but I'm willing to. So thank you, Dylan. That's great. Let me pivot to Corey here because I'll let you start where you want to start. I mean, after hearing all this, do you want to just take it away?
Very good. Thanks, Doug, and thanks everybody for hanging in there this long. What's great about this audience is you've not only shown care about these issues, but persistence to sit through several hours of us panelists with only 15-minute breaks in between. That type of persistence is really critical to winning these environmental battles, so give yourself a round of applause. So I want to ask a question that I think Asha asked in the last session. I just want to get a repeat of this. How many of you are currently involved in SB 131? How many of you are not involved in SB 131 currently? Okay, very good. Well, for those involved, thank you. For those who aren't involved, you have a great opportunity to get involved. And Asha, Gabriel with PCL, who will stand up and wave in the back row, and I can all help plug you into the effort. I want to talk a little bit about the context in which the abundant stuff is happening, a little bit about the threat, why this threat is so different than the threats we've seen before. Being old, I can do a little historical perspective, and what we need to do, because there are things that we certainly need to do, and we need to do them quickly and effectively. I want to go back to, on a quick tangent, Jen had mentioned, and Asha had mentioned Vernon. Back in the early 80s, the Meiji administration was trying to permit a toxic waste incinerator in Vernon that would have further complicated the health threats from the lead and everything else. They were going to do it without doing CEQA. And PCL worked with Roy Ball Allard, who is the assembly member from the area, to carry legislation. Eventually, they were required to do CEQA, and they dropped the project because of the bad effects it would have on the health. So this does make a big difference on people's lives. And I think we need to look at this in the political context of today. First, I should mention all my comments are strictly my own, not speaking for any organization, including AARP, PCL, RLF, or anybody else. So for those of us who saw the New York Times poll this past week, I mean, it's clear that across the country, the economy is the #1 issue. Twice as many people believe that most Americans can't achieve middle class like many of our parents, or for younger folks here, your grandparents and great-grandparents, some of which may be in the audience here. And the things that are really stressing people out are the cost of housing, which continues to be the #1 issue in California, being able to afford to have children, health care, and other things that are really important. So the abundance framing is really just a framing and a way of organizing, because the politically powerful word is affordability. And what we hear politicians talking about is not abundance. We hear them talking about affordability. Abundance provides a center to left of center excuse for jumping on this deregulation type of a thing. And we've seen this whenever there's a anxiety about the economy. We see threats to CEQA, we see the Coastal Act, our hazardous waste laws, and many others. We see this repeatedly whenever the economy dips down. But it's different than the past. Last year and this year, we are in a much more perilous situation than we've been in the past. And I want to list some of the factors for it. First, SB 131 was a wake-up call. It's really the first time we saw a substantial pulling back of our environmental laws. There's probably nothing more crazy and stupid to exempt from CEQA than the most polluting industrial facilities that can cause cancer, can cause birth defects, asthma, all kinds of other health threats, let alone other environmental threats. But that was engineered by factor #2. It's left to center of Democrats. It's not just Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. Here in California, it's left of center Democrats. The budget play where this advanced manufacturing suddenly appeared on Friday, and it was voted and signed into law on Monday of that next week, was engineered by Governor Newsom and San Francisco State Senator Scott Wiener, who chaired the Budget Committee. Fortunately, he's no longer chairing the Budget Committee. San Francisco has always been a stalwart in terms of environmental support. Most recent PPIC poll on the environment showed that Bay Area voters continue to lead in terms of environmental concern. Yet, Wiener has been a champion of gutting CEQA, and I would imagine would be going after more of our laws. #3, industry is smelling blood. So we shouldn't expect the advanced manufacturing to be the only exemption that they're going for. They have another month before the bill deadline, or another few weeks before the bill deadline. Plus, many of these bills get introduced at the last minute when there's very little time to review, when there's a lot of other bills before the legislature, whether it's at the end of the budget session, like SB 131, or the end of the legislative session. That's why voters created the 72-hour rule, so at least there's a little bit of time to look at things. But it's very hard when you're going to blow up a $300 billion budget. You had only a weekend to get ready for this. Yet, I guess there's a silver lining of all this was ASHA, PCL, and other groups rallied over 200 organizations around the state to put pressure on legislators to oppose the advanced manufacturing and to help get 26 co-authors of Mr. Connolly's bill that we heard about in the last session to try to clean it up. The third factor, or fourth factor, is we're seeing massive spending by the oil industry. How many of us have seen the ads about why environmental regulations are what's costing us higher gas prices and higher utility costs, and why we can't get middle-class jobs? Those are paid for by the Western States Petroleum Association, Chevron, Shell, Mobil, Exxon, and others. They're very smart in how they're marketing to working class communities and others, whether it be on TV, social media ads, or otherwise. And then, as Dylan, through her good research, has shown, we're seeing tech billionaires coming in with a lot of money to further undo our environmental laws. I looked at the Fair Political Practices disclosures yesterday for the Chamber of Commerce's initiative that would really turn CEQA into a paper tiger. Let me give you one example of what it is. Under current law, if a project's approved in violation of the CEQA, a court has the ability to stop that project and tell the agency, this project is stopped until you do CEQA right. Under the Chamber initiative, if they violate the law, the only thing that the court can do is to say, go fix the paperwork, but the project can keep going forward. That's how bad this initiative is. And that's only one of the problems with it. So who's funding the Chamber initiative or things like that? Well, Google's Sergey Brin, Eric Schmidt are the biggest donors to a PAC that's the biggest donor to the Chamber of Commerce's initiative. I mean, agribusiness donors like Stuart Resnick and many other funders are putting a lot of money into things like the Chamber initiative or other efforts to roll back the environmental laws. Factor number 5, the media has really retrenched. We used to be able to go into the Capitol and talk within like an hour to reporters from 10 different media outlets, back at the old Ellis building and the old Senator Hotel building where there used to be Capitol reporters. Now there's almost no Capitol bureaus. LA Times, Sacramento Bee has very few Capitol reporters now. It just isn't there. The media is increasingly owned by corporate entities. I think we all need to make our own conclusions, whether that's affecting editorial reporting. In news and reporters, there are very few experienced reporters who understand the details, the significance of the environmental laws, why they're there, and all that. There's some very good reporters at the LA Times, San Jose Mercury News as well. But the young reporters that are trying to learn and cover this don't have the time, they don't have the background, and they're bombarded with media messaging and PR stuff. So we don't have the media that we used to be able to go to when there was bad environmental bills and say, hey, look what's going on here. And often just media coverage was enough to kill bad legislation. And then, as I think Aaron had mentioned, you've got huge turnover in the legislature, not just members, but also legislative staff that have little background on how CEQA actually works. Even members that are very experienced often don't know how CEQA works. They have no idea why CEQA was adopted. They don't have the time to really learn it, and they're very susceptible to all the examples that industry has brought forth in terms of the things that CEQA may have, or citizens may have stopped in their communities and others, and they see it as a barrier to economic progress. That's a real problem because unless people realize and understand why we have these environmental laws, they don't understand why they're so important. So the type of and they also don't understand how our environmental laws have created hundreds of thousands of jobs, massive economic development, whether it be in solar, pollution control, or other things, or the importance of why the environmental protection is important to protect our tourism industry and all that. They hear a lot from the industry lobbyists. So where do we go from here? What can we do? Well, first, let me ask how many of you are students? Okay, for those folks who are students who are listening through this, you are the most important people in this room. Because first, you're going to have to live with the consequences, all the things my generation screwed up, and all the things that the current generations are going to screw up, unless we bring about change. Second, you've got the energy. Those of you in law school or studying these issues will have the smarts to help carry forward what a lot of people in this room and other people have worked so hard to create over the years in getting these laws passed. But unless we're educating ourselves and educating legislators and others, these laws our protections for communities are all at stake. We know the public continues to support clean air, clean water, protection of wildlife, protection of habitat, protection of communities. Those public values are there, and we need to be able to communicate those in ways that matter. Many years ago, the House Speaker of Congress, Tip O'Neill, said, all politics is local. All politics is local. And that's really important. Legislators may hear from lobbyists in the Capitol, in the state Capitol. They may hear from them in the national Capitol. But who do legislators care the most about? Well, they care a lot about their campaign donors, but the people they care the most about are the people that have to reelect them or that get the opportunity to elect them to another office. If those people stay silent, those people don't get active, they don't have to pay attention to them. And so the most important thing we can do on SB 131 and to prevent future rollbacks that could very well happen this year is we need to be activating ourselves, our neighbors, and others in the legislative districts to be talking to members to let them know, first, if they supported the cleanup bill, Mr. Connolly's legislation, to thank them and push for strong cleanup. But secondly, they voted for SB 131, which almost all of them did. We need to express anger. We need to have pushback, and we need to urge them and get as many members of their districts to be contacting them to tell them that this is awful, this is going to endanger people's lives, and you have the power to change this because you have the power to put this stupid law into effect. Having that type of pushback is extremely important. That type of pushback, the organizing that OSHA did, that PCL did, and others, got the legislature, many legislators are very mad at Scott Wiener. Notice he's no longer chair of the Budget Committee. He's chairing the Elections and Reapportionment Committee, which doesn't do anything except in a redistricting year, thank goodness. But it's that type of pushback in the district, but we have to keep it up because the money is against us on this, but people power in the districts is extremely important. In addition to that greater action with the individual legislators is educating legislators and their staff as to why these laws are important, why you care about clean air and clean water and the laws like CEQA, like Clean Water Act, the Port of Cologne Act, and others that are important to protecting those resources. They're so important to our health, our quality of life, our economy, and our natural environment. Unless we educate them about it, they're so much more susceptible to what industry proffers in terms of arguments, because certainly they're going to hear them. It's also important to be educating reporters, because reporters are the ones that are going to be communicating to the general public. And reporters cover a lot of issues. They don't have a lot of time to get into this stuff, and especially younger reporters. It's important to spend time with them and explain the importance in their newspaper or TV station's area of interest of how this plays out and why this is important. One of the ways you can tell how this applies locally, and Gabriel can help you see how to do this as well, is pull up your city's zoning ordinance and look to see where all the industrial sites are and look to see how close houses are to those industrial sites, because these heavily polluting facilities that will be putting carcinogens and birth control affecting chemicals out into the environment are going to be affecting those houses because of the advanced manufacturing legislation. And helping legislators, reporters, your neighbors understand that is really important. Accountability is really important. As I mentioned, if we don't have pushback, they're just going to see that they can roll right over us. One of the things that I hope happens is that when a toxic waste site happens or a pollution, a horrible pollution thing, hopefully they won't happen, that result from SB 131, I hope that we all will pay tribute to Senator Wiener and start calling those Wiener sites. It's one of those things that I'm always hoping for.
Corey?
Okay. When there are problems, let's get ahead of the curve. Let's try to find solutions to these issues. There's things we want to see, like renewable energy, solar and others. We want to see other things happen with restoration projects. There's some creative things like desert renewal energy conservation program, the way San Francisco Bay restoration happens, even things like the governor's environmental leadership projects where they can reduce the time for litigation. Kevin Johnson, a number of years ago for PCLF, headed a negotiation between EJ, environmental developers, and local government attorneys to try to develop CEQA reforms. There's things that we need to do, whether it's because we want to expedite things that we want to see happen, or we need to address problems in our various laws, either they're not working well or they're creating pushback. We need to be pragmatic. Finally, we need to be educating the gubernatorial candidates because we can't afford to have another governor that's going to attack our environmental laws. With that, I'm going to conclude. Sorry for going over time. And again, the actions that we each take moving forward are going to be really important to protect our air, our water, the health of our communities, and the health of our environment. Sorry for taking so long.
Thank you, Corey, but very well said. Very well said. I mean, one of the things, and I took notes because number 5, you talked about a young reporter. You got one right next to you here. I'm gonna put the whole shoulder of journalism on you. We're looking to you as a young reporter, and I can tell everybody, you know, this is Greg Weaver. You already introduced yourself, Fresno Land. You're one of the exceptional ones. You're one of the ones that actually does the hard hitting and the investigative reporting and stuff. And I always wonder, how do you do that? So do you want to tell us about Fresno Land and how it's different, how it compares with, say, the other newspapers, let's say print journalism, et cetera, and how do you do what you do?
Yeah, so I got some stuff to say about abundance, but I guess I'll just talk about my method and then how maybe it informs my abundance-related coverage. Yeah, so I mean, the big thing is, above all, you know, do people read drop site news in this room? Heard of it? Yes? No? I'm getting.
You got one.
You've heard of Fresno Land? Right, drop site news, Fresno Land, like these independent media organizations have just they've proven invaluable over the last few years. And so, you know, there's different funding mechanisms. It's either reader supported or philanthropic. And in this case, you know, I'm writing from Fresno, this place in the middle of California where historically you've had to be, have, you know, pretty corporate friendly, developer friendly, editorial relationship. And so a lot of things haven't gone addressed in terms of, you know, land use and the stuff that I write about. And so,
Thank you. That covers it because I mean we've all seen sort of the migration of the corporate media, and there are the exceptions. There are the outlets that still get the good stories, the voices, the investigative and hard-hitting journalism. So
it's sad. I think journalism's gotten a lot worse. It's become a symptom of this overall system decay, you know, of the economy, of the climate, of just institutional collapse, you know, just know-nothings everywhere.
Okay, well, that said, then what do you have to say? What do you have to say about abundance, or is that?
No, yeah, okay. So I think one of the best living writers is Toby Haslett, and he said something about abundance in mid 2025 that I still think is true. But then after hearing everything that's been going on and seeing Dylan's presentation about, you know, I mean, this movement has links of people that are doing truly awful things and have links to what's happening with ICE and whatnot. In Minneapolis and whatnot, Palantir and these, you know, dragnets of surveillance. And so I think, so Toby said that the abundance movement is ASMR for Democratic staffers. And so I think it's actually a quite apt phrase because I think the ideas at the core of it are quite hollow. But at the same time, I mean, you have, you know, an American state that's going truly berserk right now under the Trump administration, and the liberal wing of the Democratic Party has kind of made a few beds with the right in this case. I think that's what Dylan's presentation
should. Should I ask people to Google ASMR? Or Okay.
But people know what ASMR is, right? Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
we
like
got it.
it's like these YouTube videos. It's just people. It's like these YouTube influencers make soothing sounds. They'll just like I'm scratching cellophane or something like that. They'll get these crazy microphones. It's just completely contentless material. And so Toby was saying that this abundance policy agenda has basically the same material foundation. And so, I think I think abundance is hollow, and I think what abundance really is this sort of fantasy that Democrats have that they can resolve these problems that are facing everyday people. And I want to talk first about these major national issues, which housing's unaffordable everywhere. It doesn't matter which city, frankly, you go to. But as Corey said, like all politics is local, and so I think when I'm talking, what I want to talk about is how to address those two sort of problems. And so I think abundance is hollow. Why has potentially the future president of the United States, Gavin Newsom, like he's trying to prop up this abundance agenda, and I think it's a direct outcome that Democrats right now are not an opposition party in America, and frankly, Klein is at the very top of this donor-led system, and I think Klein's right. And the appeal that he has towards Democratic staffers, Corey, you talk about me. I mean, they don't know what CEQA is. So they go for the ASMR. It makes, I think, pretty intuitive sense. And it's quite obvious. You go to any city in America and you can see the negative consequences of how inequality has shaped this economy, which is based off of this general idea of asset price inflation. I mean, you look at home prices. I mean, I looked at it today, and the average home price in San Francisco in like 2003 was like $500,000, $600,000. I mean, it's just ridiculous to think that that used to be the case. And so this has happened everywhere. San Francisco is kind of the lodestar of it. But this has been the outcome of decades of quantitative easing, and we can get into federal. I can gesture towards Federal Reserve stuff, but I think it's far too late in the afternoon to be talking about that. But say that again. I want to talk about. You want to talk about it? All right. Well, give me a question at the end. All right. The negative aspect of this asset price logic is that it basically has become harder and harder for anybody to buy into this, right? You either bought into it in 2005 or 2000 or 1995, or you're screwed. And you talk about young people, and I mean, unless you're inheriting $1 million, you're just going to be paying somebody's lavish mortgage for your whole life, unless you can get one of these abundance jobs, I guess. And so I think there's that side of it, that there's this, people feel that they're at a dead end. Normal people, right? I mean, a nurse, a teacher. I mean, you do everything right. You go to college, you work, and you're a pillar of your community, and you won't get ahead, right? So that's one part of it. But also, I think Klein and Thompson and all these other guys, and except the Kochs, they're doing very well. But I think Klein and Thompson, I mean, I think they truly do feel like they're dead enders as well. I think, and this is the other part of it. They're dead enders because of this asset economy. The big problem with the asset economy, we saw this with COVID, and this has been the major problem that basically ended the Biden administration, was that you had the Federal Reserve during COVID print. There's an economic historian named Robert Brenner who came up with this figure. But if you look at how the Federal Reserve leveraged the congressional stimulus in 2020, 21, 2022, it was $10 trillion that were infused in the economy. And the problem is every supply side liberal will tell you, I mean, this is their golden goose. I mean, $10 trillion just fresh off the money press. What does an economy do with that? It all went into stocks and homes and benefited only 10% of America, if that. And everybody else got screwed, right? They got unaffordable rents. They got evicted. The money got so good that it then fueled this AI boom that we're all talking about right now. And in order for those investors to get their return, everybody else's environmental rights have to get trampled over, right?
So there's that common line between the economic inequalities and the environmental degradation. I mean, that's what I wanted to connect and reinforce. We saw it earlier, but it's just very dramatic.
So, even if these wonks were able to, this whole book, the two things they probably want to do is, come out with increased wages and increase employment overall, right? And the problem is when every time you get the money presses going to increase investment, home prices go up. Well, to employ an extra person, you have to pay those exorbitant rents, right? You're going to get less and less bang for your buck. You have to pay for these massive houses that are exorbitantly priced, crappy apartments in San Francisco or whatnot, right? And so I think the problem at the bottom of this is the supremacy of assets within, the American economy, stockholders and homeowners, I would say. And I'll explain that a little more. But the reason why Klein and Thompson are dead enders is that the Democratic policy circles cannot address the class conflicts at the heart of this. And they can't, and this is why they can't be in opposition. They're not an opposition party right now. We have these massive attacks on the streets right now that just, violate any sense of civil liberties or democracy or whatnot. And it just, what are the Democrats doing? They're hosting a YouTube conference with, 20 people in attendance or whatnot.
Well, and I see other panelists maybe, wondering and maybe wanting to ask a question or comment on, these are some pretty powerful points you're making. But I guess I'll leave that to the end or after you get,
Yeah. So I think, there's this, we have this abundance thing, right? And I love when I'm thinking about how to think about abundance, I love as a writer foils. And so there's another book that I think is a far, far better book than abundance. It's called More and More and More. It's written by this Frenchman. I would butcher his name, but it came out this year, and it's about how about basically the biggest policy failure in world history, which is this notion of that we could have an energy transition. And it's actually about how there's this common way of talking about it where we went from wood power to coal power to oil power, and it's basically all false. It's not that these energy sources have replaced each other. It's that each new energy source added on top of each other. And so when we're thinking about the notion of a climate transition, right now what we're seeing is that you have all this wind and solar coming online, but we're not reducing oil consumption. We're not reducing the amount of CO2 that we're burning in the air. And I bring this up, but why am I bringing up energy? Basically, housing and oil are the same exact problem. And this is what democratic policy cannot solve because it has not addressed this fundamental class conflict. This number is shocking to me. I checked it this morning to make sure I was right. So the value of U.S. home equity right now is $17 trillion. This is the same value as the oil reserves that would be stranded if we were to stop warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So in other words, if somebody goes up to you and says, I'm going to make housing 2 times as affordable right now, I mean, what you're saying is you're going to destroy $8 to $10 trillion in future claims for asset holders, either homeowners or, BlackRock or whatever. And so what we know about the energy transition, that the Democrats, the Republicans, and any other democracy that we know of in the world right now that is managing capitalism has been unable to tell the oil companies, no, you are going to destroy the planet. I mean, there's a piece in The Guardian last year talking about how if we do burn these reserves valued at, $17 trillion or whatnot, we're looking at, mass displacement that would result in the death of billions of people by this end of the century. I mean, right? I mean, this is what we're talking about when we talk about not addressing the climate problem. And so I guess I'm saying is that if housing is oil in terms of the politics, they share the same exact politics. And what's extraordinary, and I didn't even see Dylan's presentation before this, but the fact that we have so many oil interests, fossil fuel interests funding this abundance movement, and they are so aligned with housing is quite telling. So in terms of when I wrote this up and, its actual predictive capacity, I think this is, important. And so what Klein and Thompson end up doing is they turn this issue of class conflict, that some people have $17 trillion in equity, and that has locked out everybody else and that they could get displaced. They turn it into some technocratic issue. They go look at basically the rights won by a few CEQA cases, from lawyers in this room, and say, no, that's the problem on why everything is out of control. It's laughable, frankly, if it's not, weren't so aligned with such, abominable people.
Okay, well, and that's that you may not be able to hear that elsewhere. So thank you for coming here today.
Yeah.
This is like drawing a lot of connections that I knew we were going to get something from putting everybody at together in the room and on a discussion. So I want to ask first if we have questions for each other, but I'm also going to open it, questions for the audience, for all of us anywhere. But Dylan, do you want to take the first shot?
Yeah, not a question, just a comment about Thompson and Klein as dead enders. In case anyone was wondering, Derek Thompson's speaking fee ranges from, I think, $35,000 to $50,000 per appearance. Ezra Klein's is $45,000 to $70,000, I believe. So if that's where my career dead ends, I'm going to be just fine. But, dead end means something different in those circles.
I mean, yeah, being a servant for basically the master ruling class is a lot different than, they're dead enders in terms of solving any social problems that real people face day to day. That's kind of, they don't know how to solve it because these are real class conflicts that require a multiracial working class movement. And so instead they're getting funded by these goons.
Okay, well, let me go
Dylan,
to...
so the speaking fees are about the same as we get on the PCL panels.
Where's my money, Doug?
I can assure you that is not the case. So, Jen?
I actually have a question for Ebony. So just for context, so Ebony, I saw your Substack post about abundance. I was actually on sabbatical, and I'm just hearing what's going on in Sacramento on SB 131. I'm kind of spiraling because when I left for my sabbatical, that's not where we were in terms of policy. But I guess for you, when you wrote that, what was kind of the reaction from folks? Because honestly, when I read it, I was thank God someone said something.
Honestly, it was positive. And as you said, everybody was like, I'm glad that you said something and you actually hit on the head what I was trying to say or what I was thinking. And many of my colleagues, friends said it left them feeling very unsettled, also in the face of what's happening in our government with the cuts with DOGE, with EPA, and how NEPA has been narrowed and basically had some of the teeth taken out of it. I think it is incumbent upon us. We talked about, or we've heard everybody say, oh, there's a big marketing campaign. I do think that we need a marketing campaign that counters this message and actually defines what abundance is for folks. Because if we allow them to do it, it won't get us where we need to get. And we all know what abundance needs to mean in terms of equity and in terms of creating a future for all of us.
One of the alternative titles, we debated a number of titles, maybe 100, and one of them was an abundance of equity, right? And it's sort of abundance is not the thing that's wrong. It's how you define it. And if you can define it the right way, then, you know, it's not a dirty word. It's been around for a long time. So I thought you were maybe stretching, but I see it as a hand. So.
I was going to say, though, we do need to recognize that, like, California, we know is the fourth largest economy in the world right now, but we have the highest rate of poverty in the nation. We have the dirtiest air. We have over 1 million people who do not have access to safe drinking water. So, I mean, things like CEQA are wonderful, but not working. We have a supermajority Democratic. And I think people are angry and to say now we're under these other pressures, but sort of we need to come back with what are some real solutions. And that's what, not just this is wrong, but the state has, homelessness, we lead the nation in homelessness, all these we have the highest rates of autism because of some of our dirty air in the nation. So, we need to have some positive message and actual solutions to these things. And I haven't really heard,
Let me bring that back.
CEQA's not, it's great, but it's not the answer to these problems.
Let me bring that back as a great question, which is, what is the positive messaging? Because I had it down as one of mine, is how do we coexist with abundance? I mean, people asked earlier, what is the positive that we can go out with? Anybody want to?
Well, I think this is something that I say often, and I think this is and for any, if we're thinking about co-governance in general, I think it is one thing to elect somebody. I think it is another thing for that elected to actually listen to their constituents. And I feel like the problem is, I think Senator Cabaldon said it earlier, nobody wants to go to a meeting and get yelled at, right? But the reality is that it, democracy, little d, is messy. And the conversations go back and forth. And I will say, as an organizer and as an attorney, and using the legal tools that we have, that the outcomes are improved by having conversations. And I think what scares me the most about, asking for deregulation is because you're actually silencing people from having any comments, and they throw it into this whole pile. I've had people tell me, even as I represent an environmental justice organization, well, aren't you just a NIMBY? And I often say that is it's not the same, because it is about an equity issue. I'm talking about representing communities who've never been asked what they want to see in their communities, or asked to as Asha was saying, how do we vision that? So how do we allow for people to participate in the system, people who may not own property, people who may not be documented? How do you get them to be participating even though they are in the community, right? So I feel I think the thing is, we want immediate progress, and kind of to the point that was shared right now, it's just kind of we're moving from one thing to the other, but we're not really phasing out stuff. But we're also not thinking about how do we envision a more, I guess, equitable society where maybe it just does look a lot different than how we are now. Because what I see right now is nobody wants to give up anything, right? We're just kind of just spiraling through, spinning around and doing all the same things. But we're asking the most, the folks who have the least to do the most. And we're not asking the people who are the 1%. I think this is the thing that bothers me the most about, we just need more housing. That housing isn't about people purchasing or having any stewardship of that land. That housing is that we're going to have more units that are going to have large equity firms who are going to own properties, and you're just going to pay rent to that. And there isn't even rent control, and there aren't tenant protections. So there are a whole bunch of things that I feel are you not, public benefits haven't increased since the 90s. How are we going to ask folks who are chronically houseless to pay when we have systems now where, as an eviction defense attorney, the hardest landlords tended to be people who are housing homeless folks. So I feel there's something that doesn't add up. It's not about just units. again, but I think it's also asking, like, what are the things that our neighbors do need? What do we need as a community? And I don't know. I think it's because, to be honest, when you go back, we just think about private property and how that's more important than like our actual human rights.
Well, thank you, Jen. And I want to get another panelist input. There's a more question there, but let me ask if Dylan, you want to comment too already?
Yeah, I'll keep it quick so that we can move on. Two pretty short points. One is I agree that there is a need for a positive agenda. Yeah, it's not my job, so hopefully other people can do that. And I think that it's really important to recognize that part of why abundance is popular isn't I don't think it has that much of a durable, real positive agenda either. It's all about stripping things away. But they can point to California and say, CEQA has been the law of the land. It's still got terrible pollution. It hasn't solved water issues. And I think where abundance has its strongest case is talking about how blue cities have not lived up to the needs of their constituents. And I think that the way to preempt that, the way to fight and preserve community input and preserve democratic systems like what Jen is saying is that it's going to take a lot of legwork and a lot of elbow grease to make sure that those things are actually working. And I don't really have a better answer beyond that, aside from I think the new Mamdani administration has sort of been a very good case study about taking some of the abundance ideas that do work. He invokes abundance every once in a while because there's some powerful abundance orgs in New York that he likes to play nice with. And what you've seen is a split where some abundance groups have been fully on board with this sort of synthesis that Mamdani represents, and some are still vehemently opposed to it. And I think that's where you see the split between earnest groups trying to do well that are caught up in the fad and following the money because they need money to do stuff, and people who are using it as a centrist political project. And I think if you can replicate what the Mamdani administration did, and you can peel off the people who are genuinely interested in that sort of good faith collaboration, then you can build a positive agenda. That was not as short as I meant it to be, but hopefully it was at least a little bit interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is reminding me that maybe abundance is ill-defined as advanced manufacturing. I mean, what is it really? And it's up to people to fill in the void. There was a question here first in blue, please.
I agree with the goals or the objectives of everybody on the panel have so for a long time. But in terms of rolling back regulations, rather than I realize the abundance community apparently is focusing on rolling back regulations. I'm more concerned about environmental laws. I'm more concerned with going back through our codes and rewriting them to clean them up. If we use the term guardrail as a metaphor for regulation, and I like that term, unfortunately I see the guardrail as scabbed together with little 1x4s and pieces of cyclone fencing and nails sticking out and splitters. There's so many overlapping, the devil's in the detail. And even as a small business owner, it's a challenge keeping up with complying. It's an expensive challenge in time and money. And I think we need to be addressing that as well.
Let me say, as a observation, because I think that was more observation. I'm sorry to say, but we're at the 5, but I don't mind going to 5 or 5:10 because we're going to roll into essentially a happy hour. Like, I need a drink at this point. If people don't mind, I really I want to thank you for the question. I want to close the question. I want to thank the panelists and really appreciate your discussion today. I mean, this has just been fantastic. And please, I want to ask you to join me in thanking everybody.